Sansui built some of the finest receivers the world has ever heard. Today, the company that built them is gone. In the 70s, hi-fi wasn't a hobby. It was an arms race. And Sansui kept raising the stakes until they built a machine so big, it had to be manufactured in two pieces. From a 40-watt tube chassis to a 300-watt, 100-pound monster. Every receiver, in order. Sansui didn't lose this war. They won it. And winning is what cost them the company. You'd assume a brand capable of building that would still be standing. The name is still out there. Today it's printed on cheap televisions. To understand how Sansui could build that monster, you have to understand what they made before they ever built a receiver. Transformers. Kosaku Kikuchi founded Sansui in Tokyo in 1947, in a country still in ruins. He didn't make speakers. He didn't make amplifiers. He made copper wire wound around iron cores. The most boring part in any piece of audio gear. It's also the most important, because an amplifier doesn't make music, it makes current. And the transformer is what turns the electricity in your wall into something a speaker can push against. If the transformer is weak, the amp runs out of breath the second a bass note hits. Every other manufacturer bought their transformers from somebody else. Sansui built their own. In the 50s, that was worth nothing. High fidelity was American territory. Fisher, Scott, Macintosh, Marantz, and made in Japan meant cheap. A Japanese company didn't sell serious audio in the United States because nobody was buying it. But there was a gap. In 1960, putting together a decent system meant 3 separate boxes: a preamp, a power amp, a tuner, 3 chassis, 3 price tags, an entire cabinet. Most people couldn't afford it. The ones who could often had nowhere to put it. The fix looked obvious. Put it all in one box, a receiver. And that's where the real problem starts. Because the moment you do that, you're dropping a radio tuner, a device built to detect microvolts, signals so faint they're measured in millionths of a volt, into the same chassis as a power amp throwing around hundreds of watts and dumping heat like a clothes iron. It's like asking somebody to hear a whisper inside a factory. Noise, hum, interference. And the only way to win that fight is with a power supply so clean and so oversized that the tuner never even knows the amp is there. With a better transformer, which is the one thing Sansui had been building for 13 years. That advantage took over a decade to pay off in full. And when it did, it produced the machine most collectors name first when they hear the word Sansui. It isn't the biggest. It isn't the most expensive. It's this one. Walk into any vintage audio forum today, ask about Sansui, and one model comes up before all the others. It's not the rarest. It's not the most expensive. It isn't even the most powerful thing they built. It's the 9090 DB. And to understand why this machine, and not the monster of 1979, is the one people reach for first, you have to look at what Sansui was fighting in 1976. The radio. That sounds absurd now. But in the 70s, FM was the most important source of music on Earth. No streaming, no CDs. You had your records, and you had the station. And the station came with a problem nobody had solved in decades. Hiss. That constant whisper behind the song, like sand pouring somewhere in the back of the room. The farther you sat from the transmitter, the worse it got. You could spend $900 on a receiver and still be listening to sand. So Sansui did something almost nobody else did. They put a Dolby decoder inside the receiver. Those 2 letters on the end of the name, DB, aren't decoration. They're Dolby B, the same technology that cleaned the hiss off cassette tape, aimed at radio broadcasts. A handful of American stations started transmitting Dolby encoded, and if you owned a 9090 DB, the hiss just fell away. That's the DB. And it's the reason a 9090 and a 9090 DB are not the same machine. But it's the power that made this thing a legend. 125 watts per channel into 8 ohms. And here's the detail that separated Sansui from half the market. That number wasn't measured at 1000 hertz, the easiest possible point on the spectrum, where the industry loved to inflate its specs. It was measured from 20 hertz to 20,000, the full range of human hearing, at less than 0.1% distortion. When Radio Electronics tested the 9090 in 1976, it was the most powerful integrated receiver they had ever put on a bench, and it was underselling itself. Modern restorations of the 9090 DB have pushed it past 150 watts before clipping. Sansui was delivering more than the number on the box. All of it weighed 52 pounds. A receiver as heavy as a 7-year-old child. $900 in 1976. Well over $5,000 today. And now the irony. Of everything inside the 9090 dB, the most fragile part is the exact part it's named after. The Dolby board, the F2436, is infamous among techs. Its transistors fail. Buy a 9090 dB today, and there's a real chance the one function those two letters stand for is dead. The machine outlived 50 years. The idea it was named for didn't. They're still out there anyway, thousands of them, in basements, in shops, at auction, changing hands for somewhere between $800 and $3,000. Half a century on, people are still repairing them. But the 9090 dB didn't come out of nowhere. It isn't a starting point, it's an answer. An answer to 14 years of mistakes, recalls, and one failure that nearly cost Sansui its entire reputation in America. And it all started with a chassis full of glowing tubes. Before Sansui built a receiver, they sold a kit. It was called the HPR 100. It arrived in a box, in pieces, and you soldered it together yourself. Inside was a tuner section. That's the ancestor. Everything starts there. Out of that came the company's first tube receivers, the 250, the SM320, the 500, and in 1963, the one that changed things, the 1000. It lasted a year. Sansui revised it, fixed it, and sent it back out as the 1000A. That's the one that survives. The original 1000 is so rare most collectors have never laid eyes on one. 40 watts per channel, 47591A output tubes, and a number no manufacturer would print in a brochure today, 0.8% total harmonic distortion, 8 times the distortion of the 9090 dB. But here's the secret tube collectors know, and almost nobody else does. There's Hashimoto iron inside the 1000A. Hashimoto Electric started up in 1958, building high-grade audio transformers, and Sansui was one of their biggest customers. That 13-year head start, now sitting inside a chassis full of red-hot glass. And it worked. There are people who will still argue the 1000A is the best-sounding tube receiver ever made. That's a sentence normally reserved for American brands that cost 3 times as much. A Japanese company had just entered the conversation. But the 1000A had 2 problems no transformer could fix. It ran hot. So hot that plenty of owners tore the metal cover off just to let it breathe. And tubes wear out, they drift, they fade, they have to be replaced. The whole industry knew where the exit was, the transistor. And that's where Sansui nearly destroyed itself. In 1968, Sansui turned the tubes off. Their first all-solid-state receiver was the 5000, 75 watts. No glass, no furnace heat, nothing to swap out every 2 years. Alongside it, the 2000 covered the middle of the range. And it worked. The 5000 became one of the best-selling receivers the company ever made. And there are still people who insist its tuner is the finest Sansui ever built. So in 1969, Sansui did the obvious thing. They improved it. They called it the 5000A. 55 honest watts per channel. About $400. Top of the line. And then the letters started arriving. Dead speakers. Not damaged. Dead. Burned out woofers in houses across the United States. Here's the thing. Every technician who works on old amplifiers is afraid of. A speaker moves because alternating current reaches it. The signal pushes the cone forward and back, hundreds of times a second. But inside an amplifier, there's also direct current. And it doesn't swing. It pushes one way and stays there. If a fault lets that DC through to the outputs, the speaker cone doesn't vibrate. It shoves itself all the way out to the stop and holds there, with the full weight of the amplifier behind it, until the voice coil cooks. An expensive speaker can die in seconds. No warning. Barely a sound. The 5000A's design let that happen. Sansui pulled them back. The cost was enormous. The lesson was permanent. The replacement wasn't called the 5000B. It was called the 5000X, a redesign, not a patch. The same thing happened one rung down. The 2000 became the 2000A, and the 2000A became the 2000X. That letter X, which most people read as a routine update, is really a scar. It marks the moment Sansui learned that power without protection isn't power. It's a threat. From then on, every receiver the company built carried harder and harder protection circuitry. In the late models, a relay that cuts the output in milliseconds the instant it senses DC. Sansui had solved reliability, but while they were busy doing it, the American market turned into a battlefield. Pioneer, Marantz, Kenwood, and Technics were shipping models at a brutal pace, and Sansui suddenly needed a receiver for every wallet in the country. In 1973, Sansui dropped an entire lineup at once. It's known as the single-digit series, and the names are exactly that. The 6, the 7, the 8. Later came the 8 Deluxe and the 7000. There are veteran technicians who, with the whole Sansui catalog laid out in front of them, still point at the 8 and the 7000 as the best the company ever made. Not the monsters. These. But the following year, in 1974, Sansui did something smarter than building the best machine. They built one for everybody, the XX1 series. And here's the logic that still makes these things so easy to hunt down. The number tells you exactly what you're buying. The 221, 8 watts per channel. The 331, 12 watts, $200. The 441, the 551, 16 watts, $259.95. The 671 and 771. And at the top, the 881. A ladder. Climb a rung, the power goes up and the price goes up, and everything else, the build, the tuner, the philosophy, is still Sansui. A college kid with $100 and a lawyer with $1,000 were buying the same name. That's the play. Sansui stopped selling a product and started selling a brand. And here's the part that catches people off guard today. The 221, the 8-watt model, the cheapest thing in the catalog. The people who own one defend it with an intensity no budget component has any right to earn. 8 watts, and it sounds better than it has any business sounding. Because in 1974, even Sansui's cheap receiver had a Sansui-designed transformer inside it. The latter was working. The money was coming in. Sansui was at its absolute peak in sales and visibility. And that is exactly when the entire industry bet on a technology that was about to fail. In 1971, the audio industry thought it had found its next billion-dollar business. 4 channels instead of 2. They called it quadrophonic. 2 speakers in front, 2 behind. The listener sitting inside the sound. On paper, it was the future. In practice, it became the most expensive mistake of the golden age of hi-fi. And the problem wasn't technical. It was political. Because nobody could agree on how to do it. CBS launched their system, SQ. Sansui launched theirs, QS. JVC and RCA pushed a third, CD4, completely incompatible with both. 3 formats fighting over the same living room, and a customer standing in a store in 1973, holding a quad record, with no way to know whether it would even play on the system he was about to buy. Buy the wrong gear, and your record collection goes silent, so people did the only rational thing. They bought nothing. Sansui, meanwhile, went all in. QS wasn't like CD4, which needed special records cut with extra information buried in the groove. QS was a matrix system. Take 4 channels, fold them into 2, then pull them back apart on playback. It sounded like magic. It was, essentially, a mathematical trick. The first version of QS was mediocre. Channel separation was poor. Sounds bled from one speaker into the next. So Sansui built the Vario Matrix, a decoder that analyzed the signal in real time and adjusted the separation on the fly. And it worked. It worked so well that 50 years later, there are sound engineers who still prefer Sansui's decoder to anything a competitor made. That circuit went into the QRX series, the QRX 3500, the QRX 7001, the QRX 8001, and at the top, the QRX 9001, a receiver that could decode all 3 rival formats at once, QS, SQ, and CD4, in one chassis. Sansui had solved the problem that was sinking the entire industry, incompatibility, by cramming the whole war inside a single machine. It is one of the most complex pieces of consumer electronics ever built. There are repair shops today that flatly refuse to open one, and it arrived too late. By the time the QRX 9001 hit the market, quadrophonic was already dead. The other brands were walking away from the format. Sansui had built the greatest quad receiver in the world, at the exact moment the world for it stopped existing. Remember that pattern, because you're going to see it again. While quad was sinking, Sansui did something that looks, in hindsight, like an act of faith. They went back to stereo, and they doubled everything, literally. The new names were repeated numbers, 40-0, 50-50, 60-60, 70-70, 80-80, and in 1975, the one that took the crown, the 90-90, 110 watts per channel. $750. Now look at what Sansui put on that front panel, because it changed the way audio looked forever. 2 needles, 1 per channel, calibrated from half a watt all the way to 200. They did nothing. They didn't improve the sound by a fraction of a decibel. They were there to be watched. For the first time, you could see your music. Needles jumping on the kick drum, trembling in the quiet parts. The 9090 was one of the first integrated receivers to carry dual power meters, and within 5 years the entire industry was copying them. Those needles are the reason a 20-year-old today who has never owned a record looks at a photograph of a 70s receiver and wants one. And when radio electronics measured the 9090 in 1976, it was the most powerful integrated receiver they had ever tested. Sansui was winning, but the 9090 had 2 holes. Its input section was thin. It took a single turntable, and it did nothing about FM hiss. So 1 year later, Sansui filled both holes at once. More inputs, 2 turntables, 125 watts instead of 110, and that Dolby board that gave it the 2 letters, the 9090 dB. That's where this video started. Now you know where it came from. From a tube chassis that cooked itself, from a burned-out speaker in 1969, from a 7-model ladder, from a quadrophonic format that swallowed half a decade of research. The 9090 dB isn't the beginning of the Sansui story. It's the summit, and this is where a sane company stops. Sansui had the best machine on the market, the reputation, the sales, all of it. But Pioneer had just announced something, and so had Marantz, and so had Technics, and none of them were going to stop. In 1977, Sansui threw the 9090 dB away. Not literally, commercially. They redesigned the entire lineup from the ground up and stuck a letter on the front of it, G. And the first thing you notice isn't the power, it's the look. The cold blue of the 70s is gone. Now the dial is gold, and the light behind it is warm. Amber. Sansui sold it with a line straight out of the brochure. Strikingly attractive new styling. The company had just figured out that a receiver isn't only a machine, it's furniture. And the latter came back, longer than ever. The G2000, the G3000, 26 watts, $280. The G5000, the G6000, the G7000, the G8000, and at the top, the G9000, 160 watts per channel, 35 more than the 9090 dB, the receiver that, 1 year earlier, was the most powerful thing an American magazine had ever put on a bench. That was the tempo of this war. 1 year. But look at what was actually happening. Because this is the mechanism that kills the company. None of those extra watts did anybody any good. 125 watts already filled any living room in America to the point of pain. Nobody needed 160. Nobody was ever going to need 200. Watts weren't a feature anymore. They were a number in an advertisement, a figure you printed in a magazine to beat Pioneer. And when an industry starts competing over a number nobody needs, that number only goes one direction. Pioneer was preparing the SX 1980, Marantz the 2600, Technics the SA 1000, all of them aiming at the same thing, the highest figure ever printed on the face of a receiver. Sansui was not going to lose that fight, and to avoid losing it, they built a machine that no longer fit inside one box. The G3000 wouldn't fit on a shelf, so Sansui cut it in half. One chassis holding the preamp and the tuner, a second chassis holding the power amp, cooled by a forced air fan. Bolt them together with metal brackets and you have a single component, 25 inches wide, weighing 100 pounds. 300 watts per channel. Distortion, 0.009%. Power draw at full output, 1100 watts, more than most ovens, $1,900. In 1979, below it sat the G22000, 220 watts, 93 pounds. And it was this generation that earned the nickname that now defines the entire category, monster receivers. It is the summit of 20th century consumer engineering. The manual claimed the highest slew rate ever achieved in a stereo receiver, and now the part almost nobody tells you. It didn't win. The Marantz 2600 made 300 watts. The same. The Technics SA 1000 made 330. Sansui built the biggest, heaviest receiver in history, and lost the only race it was running. The number in the advertisement, the number it sacrificed everything for, went to somebody else. They built roughly 1,000 units. 1,000. Because in 1979, nobody was paying $1,900 for a receiver. The market had already moved. People were buying separates, or buying cheap. Sansui's peak in sales had come in 1975, 4 years before they crowned their masterpiece. The same pattern as quadrophonic, again. They built the perfect machine for a world that had just stopped existing. What came next wasn't a decline, it was a fall. By 1988, Sansui was losing the equivalent of a quarter of its annual sales. In October of 1989, a British conglomerate called Polly Peck bought 51% of the company for $110 million. A year later, Polly Peck collapsed. 1.3 billion pounds of debt, a fraud investigation. Its chief executive fled the country. Sansui was passed from owner to owner for 2 decades. It finally went bankrupt in 2014. The brand survived, The name is still out there. Today it's printed on cheap televisions. But there's one thing Sansui never accounted for. That G33,000 still works. 45 years later, the machine powers up, the needles rise, and it plays. Not because it outlasted the market, but because nobody wound transformers like that man in Tokyo in 1947. Sansui lost the Watt War. They lost the company. The machine is still alive. And it wasn't the only one. While Sansui was bleeding out in the power race, another Japanese brand was building the receiver that is worth more money today than any Sansui ever made. And that story starts with an even uglier failure.